Tell me, Mrs. Osai, what exactly does a woman do the morning she discovers the man screaming her name across a lobby owns nothing he thinks he owns? That question belonged to no one in the atrium of Continental Trust Bank on a Tuesday in March, but the security cameras recorded everything. Kelechi Osai, chief investment officer, stood in the center of 60 frozen witnesses and tore Amara's lanyard from her neck with both fists. The badge spun, the plastic snapped, and every keyboard in that lobby stopped at once. She did not stumble. She did not raise her voice. She pressed her purse to her chest the way you hold something fragile and irreplaceable, and a single tear moved down her left cheek, not from sorrow, but from the cold and sudden clarity of finally seeing the man she married without the story she had told herself about him. Kelechi straightened his tie. He looked satisfied. He had no idea that 6 blocks away, in a 7th-floor office on Meridian Avenue, an estate attorney named Chidi Ez was already unsealing a 30-year-old vault document, one that listed a single beneficiary, a single controlling ownership stake, and a single name written in her grandfather's handwriting. Amara's. He fired his wife at 9:14 in the morning. By 9:22, she was sitting in her car in the parking structure, and she was not crying. She was reading, and every page she turned made the answer to that opening question more devastating than the last. Welcome to today's story. If quiet power dismantling loud arrogance is your kind of drama, subscribe and hit the bell, because this one ends nowhere near where Kelechi believes it does. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Let's begin. 48 hours before the lanyard snapped, the 32nd floor of Continental Trust Bank was nearly empty. Most of the lights had been dimmed to their overnight setting, reducing the open-plan office to a grid of glowing screens and quiet hum. Amara had not noticed the cleaning crew leave. She had not noticed much of anything for the past 2 hours except the numbers in front of her, and what those numbers were quietly refusing to add up. 7 commercial loans. Combined value, $4.3 million, all approved within a 90-day window, all flagged internally as high risk. And not one of them, not a single file in the cluster, carried the collateral documentation required by federal lending protocol. She leaned closer to her monitor. The office smelled of cold coffee and recycled air. Under her fingertips, the keyboard felt cool and deliberate as she opened the originating approval signatures one by one. The same authorization code appeared on every record, time-stamped between 11 at night and 2 in the morning, on days that did not appear on any official after-hours roster. Kelechi's code. She sat back slowly. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass behind her desk, the city stretched out in its indifferent geometry of lit windows and moving headlights. She pulled the physical loan folders from the cabinet beside her. She had always preferred paper for the moments that mattered, and began cross-referencing by hand. The receiving entities were shell-named companies she had never encountered in any client-facing document. Meridian Capital Solutions, Bridgepath Holdings LLC, Akefer and Voss Commercial Group. None of them had a verifiable operating address. She did not reach for her phone immediately. For a long moment, she simply sat with the weight of what she was reading, turning a single page over in her hands. Then she called his number. Kelechi answered on the 4th ring, his voice carrying the texture of a man interrupted mid-comfort somewhere that was not home. She kept her tone even, clinical, almost apologetic in the way she had learned to package difficult questions so they did not bruise his ego before he had processed them. She told him what she had found. She named 2 of the 7 accounts. She asked quietly whether there was documentation she was missing, a secondary approval chain, a board exemption she had not been copied on. The pause before he answered lasted 3 full seconds. "Forward me exactly what you're looking at," he said, and closed the file. Not a question, not an explanation, a door shut firmly. Amara pulled the folders back toward her and laid them flat on the desk, one on top of the other in a neat and patient stack. She did not close the file. She photographed every page. She had not turned on a single light. The living room held the particular darkness of a space that knows it is being hidden in, the the kind that gathers around a person sitting very still on a sofa with her shoes still on and her bag still across her shoulder, as though leaving again were still an option she had not ruled out. Outside, a city bus groaned past the window. Somewhere above her, a neighbor's television murmured through the ceiling. Amara heard none of it with any real attention. She was still inside the lobby. She kept returning to the sound of plastic snapping. The knock came at 7:43. 3 measured raps, not urgent, not timid, the kind of knock that carries paperwork behind it. She opened the door to a man in his late 60s, compact and unhurried, wearing a dark wool suit that had been pressed with the kind of care that spoke of habit rather than occasion. He held a leather document satchel in one hand and his hat in the other, and he looked at her the way people look at someone they have been watching from a careful distance for a very long time. "Miss Amara," his voice was low and deliberate. "My name is Chitty Ez. I was your grandfather's attorney for 31 years. I am sorry we are meeting like this. I had hoped to reach you before today." She let him in, because something in the way he said her grandfather's name made her legs decide before her mind did. He settled into the chair across from her and laid the satchel across his knees without opening it immediately. The room smelled of her grandfather suddenly, cedar and old paper, and she did not know if that was the document satchel or her own memory betraying her. Chitty explained it without rushing. 30 years ago, her grandfather had structured a proxy trust around his founding shares in Continental Trust Bank. He had watched, quietly and from a distance, how wealth had a way of arriving in a young woman's life and changing the people around her before it changed her. So he had built a wall around it. The trust was designed to remain dormant, invisible on any public registry, until the sole named beneficiary turned 30. It could not be transferred, sold, borrowed against, or discovered by a spouse during a marriage proceeding. It activated the moment she was separated from the bank's payroll. This morning at 9:14, Kelechi had unknowingly pulled the pin. Chitty opened the satchel at last and placed a single document on the table between them. At the top, in her grandfather's formal typescript, was her full name. Below it, a number, a percentage of ownership that made the room tilt slightly on its axis. "You are not an employee of Continental Trust, Miss Amara." Chitty folded his hands. "You are its majority owner, and someone has been stealing from you." She did not go home that night. There was a version of the next 12 hours that involved a confrontation, bags packed on the bed, accusations traded across a kitchen that had never quite felt like hers, the kind of scene that hollows a person out and leaves nothing useful behind. Amara sat with that version for exactly 4 minutes in the passenger seat of Chitty's car. Then she put it away. Kelechi did not deserve the warning. More importantly, the bank's clients did not deserve to lose their savings, while she spent her fury on a man who had already decided who she was. She told Chitty to drive to his office instead. By 9 that evening, the 7th floor of the Meridian Avenue building had been converted into something between a war room and an archive. Chitty's mahogany desk disappeared under printed ledger extracts, incorporation filings, and a laptop connected to a portable hard drive that Amara had retrieved from the back of her home office closet. A drive Kelechi had never known existed, because Kelechi had never understood that the quietest person in the room is not always the least prepared. 3 years ago, during a critical server migration, Amara had been the internal officer tasked with verifying data integrity across the bank's legacy systems. The migration team had sealed the primary access points afterward. They had not known she had documented every residual pathway in the process, not for any calculated reason at the time, simply because she was thorough. Because she had always believed that knowing the architecture of a thing, truly knowing it, was the only real form of security. Tonight, that habit became a key. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with a steadiness that surprised even her. The office smelled of old books and the particular warmth of a radiator working too hard against the night air. Outside the tall window behind Chitty's chair, the city had shifted into its after-midnight register, quieter, more honest. She did not feel the hour. She felt only the data, and what the data was beginning to confess. Chitty sat across from her, cross-referencing corporate registry documents with a magnifying glass and a legal pad, his handwriting small and deliberate. Neither of them spoke much. There was a grammar to the work that made conversation feel beside the point. The trace would take 72 hours to run its full path through the dormant access corridors without triggering the bank's internal security alerts. Amara initialized it at 11:47 and watched the progress bar settle into its long, patient crawl. Then she opened the first of the shell company files. Bridgepath Holdings LLC had been incorporated 16 months ago. Its registered agent address was a mailbox store on the eastern edge of the financial district. Its sole director of record was listed under a name Amara had heard before. She recognized it immediately, and the recognition was worse than she had expected. Ifoma Adiz Nwasu. Amara said nothing for a long moment. The radiator ticked. Somewhere in the building's lower floors, a door closed and the sound traveled up through the walls like a slow exhale. She set the incorporation document down with the same careful deliberation she had used on everything tonight, as though her hands understood that the wrong movement might break something that could not be repaired. Chitty looked up from his legal pad. He read her face and set his pen down. Ifoma had been a fixture at every bank function for the better part of 2 years. Charismatic, impeccably dressed, always positioned just close enough to Kelechi to suggest intimacy without confirming it. Amara had cataloged the small signals the way a careful person does, the way his voice shifted register when her name came up in conversation, the business trips with overlapping schedules, the explanations that arrived slightly too smoothly. She had filed all of it under the category of things she was not yet ready to open. The incorporation date on Bridgepath Holdings was 16 months ago. The first diverted transfer hit its account 14 months ago, 4 days after Amara and Kelechi returned from what he had called a team-building retreat in Abuja. She pulled up the second shell company, Meridian Capital Solutions. Different registered address, same mailbox district, same sole director of record. A third search returned Akafer and Voss Commercial Group, named with just enough bureaucratic camouflage to feel institutional. Ifoma's name did not appear on the surface registration of that one. It appeared one layer deeper, on the operating agreement buried in the state filing appendix, in a section most people never reached. Most people. She built them in sequence, Amara said quietly, more to herself than to Chitty. Each one slightly better hidden than the last. She was learning as she went. Chitty removed his glasses and cleaned them with the corner of his handkerchief, which means she expected to need more of them. The full transfer total, mapped across all 3 entities and cross-referenced against the 7 loans from the shadow ledger, landed at $6.8 million, moved in careful increments, never in round numbers, designed to read as operational variance to anyone scanning quickly, designed to be invisible to anyone who was not already looking. Kelechi had not acted alone. He had never intended to. Amara closed the laptop and pressed her palms flat against the desk's cool surface, steadying herself against the specific vertigo of a picture snapping into focus all at once. The money was one wound. The architecture of deliberate concealment, built by 2 people over more than a year, was another kind entirely. Her phone lit up on the desk beside her. A text from Kelechi, "Hope you're taking care of yourself." She turned it face down and opened the next file. Foma arrived at 11 in the morning with a fruit basket and a practiced expression of concern. Amara had been expecting her. Not the exact hour, not the particular arrangement of sympathy arranged across those familiar features, but the visit itself. Yes, people who build elaborate structures of deception do not leave loose ends standing upright on doorsteps. They come to check the damage personally. They come dressed as friends. "I had to see you," Ifoma said, moving through the doorway with the fluid confidence of a woman who had rehearsed the blocking. She smelled of expensive perfume, something warm and floral that filled the hallway immediately. "What Kelechi did was wrong. I want you to know I told him that." Amara let her eyes go soft. She had spent 20 minutes before the doorbell rang practicing the particular quality of exhaustion she needed to inhabit, shoulders forward, voice thinned out, the careful performance of a woman who had used up everything she had and was now simply enduring. She had learned, in 30 years of being underestimated, that people see exactly what they expect to see. She made tea. She let her hands tremble slightly on the kettle. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, and Ifoma allowed 4 minutes of genuine-sounding condolence before opening the soft leather portfolio she had carried in beneath the fruit basket. Standard severance agreement, she explained gently. 3 months of salary, a letter of professional reference, and a mutual non-disclosure clause, purely standard, she added, purely to protect everyone involved. Amara picked up the document with the careful movements of someone struggling to concentrate. She turned pages slowly, letting confusion settle visibly across her face. On the 4th page, beneath the NDA language, the severance funds were listed with their originating transfer details, and embedded within the wire instructions, formatted as reference data, were 2 international routing numbers Amara had not yet been able to locate in the ghost audit. She looked up. "I just want to make sure the payment comes through correctly," she said quietly. "These routing numbers, this is where the funds are coming from." Foma reached across and pointed to each line in turn, explaining both with the brisk efficiency of someone who had handled this paperwork before. "This one is the primary account. This one is the secondary clearance." She tapped them both firmly. "Completely secure." Amara nodded slowly, as though processing, and turned the page. Beneath the table, her thumb was moving across her phone's screen. The voice memo had been recording since the doorbell rang. She did not sign the document. She thanked Ifoma warmly, said she needed a day to read through everything, and walked her gently back to the door. The fruit basket stayed on the counter. The routing numbers were already in a message to Chitty before Ifoma's car had cleared the end of the street. The alert came through at 3:47 in the afternoon. Chitty's paralegal forwarded it without comment, which meant she had understood immediately that it did not require one. Emergency notice of special shareholder meeting. Continental Trust Bank. Agenda item, accelerated executive appointment, chief executive officer. Vote scheduled for 10 o'clock the following morning. Amara read it twice standing in the middle of Chitty's office, still wearing her coat. Kelechi had felt the ground shift. She did not know exactly which wire had trembled, whether the ghost audit had brushed against a monitoring protocol, whether one of the 7 loan recipients had asked an ill-timed question, whether simple instinct had told him the window was narrowing. It did not matter now. What mattered was that a CEO appointment carried with it the unilateral authority to restructure the bank's internal audit permissions, reclassify ledger access, and if moved through the right legal channels quickly enough, seal the shadow accounts under executive privilege pending an internal review that Kelechi himself would oversee. If the vote passed before she was ready, the evidence became considerably harder to surface in any forum that counted. She looked at Chitty. "How much of the trace is complete?" 71%, he said, already moving toward the desk. The offshore routing confirmation from this morning's recording accelerated the final leg considerably, but the documentary package, the kind that holds in a boardroom, not just on a hard drive, needs the terminal transfer records, the last pull. He checked his watch. "We have until 9 tomorrow morning to compile everything into something a board of directors cannot dismiss as circumstantial." 17 hours. Realistically, given verification and formatting, 12. Amara removed her coat and hung it on the back of the chair with a precision that had nothing to do with neatness and everything to do with keeping her hands deliberate while her mind moved at a different speed entirely. The office felt smaller than it had the night before. The radiator was silent now, and the room carried a dry, papery coldness that settled at the back of the throat. She sat down and opened the laptop. "Pull the BridgePath final quarter transfers first," she said. "If the terminal records are anywhere, they run through there." She was always tidiest with the oldest account. Chitty was already on the phone with his forensic accounting contact, his voice low and unhurried in the way of a man who had navigated other people's crises for 30 years and understood that panic was simply wasted velocity. The progress bar on the ghost audit climbed 1 increment and held. Amara did not look at it again. She looked at the files, and she began to build the case that would need to be unbreakable by morning. Her phone buzzed once on the desk. A calendar notification, auto-generated, cheerful and indifferent. Tomorrow, Kelechi board presentation, all day. The boardroom on the 41st floor had been designed to make people feel the weight of the institution before a single word was spoken. Dark paneling, a table long enough to seat 22, windows that framed the city's skyline like a painting, commissioned specifically to remind everyone in the room how much was at stake in every decision made within it. By 9:58, every chair was filled, every water glass poured, every director's attention angled toward the podium at the head of the room, where Kelechi Osai stood with the composed and radiant confidence of a man who had already, in his own mind, arrived. He spoke well. That had always been true. His voice carried the measured warmth of someone who understood that authority, performed correctly, feels like reassurance. He spoke about vision, about Continental Trust's responsibility to its shareholders, its clients, its future. He used her grandfather's name once, briefly, as a foundation stone, a man whose legacy, Kelechi said, deserved to be built upon by leadership equal to the moment. Several directors nodded. One made a note. Amara, standing in the marble corridor outside the closed boardroom doors, heard none of the specific words. She heard only the cadence of his delivery filtering through the paneling, the rise and fall of it, the practiced pauses, and she recognized it the way you recognize a song that was played too often in a house you no longer live in. Chidi stood beside her. His document satchel was closed. Everything that needed to be inside it was inside it. Through the doors came the board chair's voice. Clear and procedural. We will now move to the vote on Agenda Item 1, the accelerated appointment of... Chidi opened the door. The sound of 22 people turning in their chairs was not loud, but it was absolute. He walked to the midpoint of the room at his customary unhurried pace and addressed the board chair directly, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man who has never once needed to raise it to be heard. He identified himself by name and credential. He indicated that he represented a majority proxy shareholder of Continental Trust Bank, one who held the binding right, under the terms of the original founding trust, to attend and vote in any shareholder proceeding in person. The board chair's pen stopped moving. Kelechi's hands found the edges of the podium. That shareholder, Chidi said, is present and wishes to address this board before any vote is recorded. The doors at the far end of the boardroom opened. Amara walked in wearing the same navy blazer she had worn when she was escorted out of this building 4 days ago. She carried no bag. She carried nothing except the folder under her arm and the absolute stillness of someone who had already decided how this ends. Her eyes found Kelechi's across the length of the table. She did not look away. She took the folder to the head of the table. Not the podium. The podium belonged to a role Kelechi had not yet earned and would not be keeping. Amara set the folder down at the table's head with the quiet finality of someone placing the last piece of a structure that had taken 4 days and 30 years to build simultaneously, and she looked at the board chair with an expression that was neither hostile nor warm, but simply clear. My name is Amara Osai. I am the majority proxy shareholder of Continental Trust Bank, with 53.4% of the founding trust vested in my name as of 4 days ago. She let that settle for exactly 2 seconds. I would like to table the current agenda item and introduce a matter of significantly greater urgency to this board. Kelechi moved first. His voice came out shaped like authority, but something structural had already failed inside it. This is irregular. The board should verify the legitimacy of any. The documentation is in front of your chair, Chidi said from the side of the room, without looking up from his legal pad. Kelechi looked down. He did not pick up the folder. Amara nodded once to Chidi's paralegal at the back of the room, who connected the laptop to the boardroom's display system. The screen behind the podium filled with the first document, Bridgepath Holdings LLC, Incorporation Records, Ifoma Adiz Nwasu listed as sole director, dated 16 months prior. She walked the board through it without theater. Transfer records from 7 unsecured loans, cross-referenced against 3 shell entities. The routing numbers, confirmed on audio recording by the account's architect herself. The terminal transfer figures, extracted from the ghost audit completed at 4:26 that morning, showing $6.8 million moved in calibrated fragments over 14 months. Each slide replaced the last in the same measured rhythm as her voice, and the room received it in a growing silence that had texture and weight. A director near the window set down his water glass. Another quietly closed the promotional folder Kelechi's team had prepared. Kelechi himself stood at the side of the room now, no longer near the podium, though no one had asked him to move. His face had undergone a series of adjustments: indignation, then calculation, then something that had no clean name but lived in the vicinity of a man watching a structure he believed was permanent simply cease to exist. Amara reached the final slide. She turned to face him directly. Effective immediately, and under the authority vested in this trust, your employment with Continental Trust Bank is terminated. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Security will meet you downstairs. She closed the folder. The board chair reached for the phone on the side table and began to dial. They came for Kelechi at 11:30. 2 federal agents, unhurried and precise, who spoke to him in the corridor outside the boardroom in voices too low to carry through the doors. He did not make a scene. That surprised some of the directors who had gathered near the glass partition to watch. Amara was not among them. She had already moved to the side office adjoining the boardroom and was on the phone with the bank's chief compliance officer before the elevator doors had closed behind him. Ifoma was taken from her downtown apartment the same afternoon. Chitty received the confirmation at 4 o'clock and sent Amara a single line of text. She read it, set the phone face down on the desk, and went back to the compliance call. There was too much to rebuild to spend time watching things fall. 7 months later, the corner office on the 41st floor had been quietly transformed. Not dramatically. Amara was not interested in drama as an interior design principle. The heavy curtains that had darkened the room under previous occupants had been replaced with something that let the morning light come fully through. Her grandfather's photograph sat on the credenza behind the desk, not displayed with ceremony, but simply present, the way a thing is when it belongs somewhere without needing to announce itself. The desk itself was covered in the organized evidence of a particular kind of work, not the shadow ledgers and shell company filings that had covered Chitty's mahogany surface 7 months ago, but something with an entirely different texture. Loan applications. Business plans printed on paper that still smelled faintly of ink. Proposals from small enterprises, a textile manufacturer in the south of the city, a cooperative bakery, a logistics startup run by 3 siblings out of a warehouse they did not yet own but were trying to. The Continental Trust Community Capital Initiative had been Amara's first formal act as CEO. She had drafted the framework herself, working backward from the community loans Kelechi had systematically buried, and forward from the vision her grandfather had written into the margins of his original founding documents she had spent 2 weeks reading in full, not as a legal exercise, but as a conversation she had waited her whole life to have with him. The initiative's first funding round would deploy $2.4 million to 43 small businesses across the city. Every application on her desk represented someone who had been told, by one financial institution or another, that they were too small to matter. She worked through the stack with a pen and a yellow legal pad, the same combination Chitty used, a habit she had absorbed without noticing. Outside the tall window, the city moved through the particular golden quality of a late afternoon in early autumn, the light doing something generous to the skyline that it only managed a few weeks out of every year. Her assistant knocked once and opened the door. "The board summary is ready when you are," and Chitty called, "He'll be here at 5. "Thank you," Amara said, without looking up from the application in front of her. The textile manufacturer was requesting $112,000 against a 3-year revenue projection that was, by any honest measure, conservative. Someone had worked very hard on this document. She could tell by the places where the language shifted, formal in the financial sections, unguarded in the paragraph at the end that explained, briefly and without self-pity, what the business meant to the family that had built it. She approved it with a single clean signature. Then she set it aside and reached for the next one.